and you can practically ask my question anyway, but I wanted to know what it was like, comparison, contrast, differences and similarities to work with Bernstein, then Julie Stein, and then by yourself on the forum. How, you know, the processes.
Well, they were very different. Lenny likes to work in collaboration closely in a room together. He likes to, even if most of the conference consists of silence, he likes to be in the room with his collaborators. So we generally worked, I'd say, 2 days together and 1 day apart. We did a lot of talking first with Arthur Lawrence and planned the whole thing, plotted it, and discussed the style of it. The style, incidentally, is at least as much Arthur's work as it is Jerry Robinson, not to take anything away from Jerry, who is perhaps the most brilliant man in the theater. But it was primarily a question of how to find a style for the show, how to make it poetic without being pretentious, how to make it ambitious without being pretentious, and how to tell a story that would be seamless in terms of the music, the dialogue, and the lyrics, and the dance. Lenny and I, once we sort of determined what the shape of the scene was with Arthur, what I liked to do, and still do, is let the librettist write a few scenes before I start to work, so that I can get the style of the diction, which is crucial. And I'm not a playwright, and I much prefer to imitate. So Arthur would write a couple of scenes, and then we would have discussed already with Arthur where the song was to occur. And then Lenny and I would sit around for anywhere from a day to a couple of weeks determining exactly what the song should deal with. We would try to come up with a title or a frame line that would express exactly what was needed. And then we would sometimes fiddle together, he at the piano, so I sometimes in another room, sometimes in the same room, just getting lyric shapes, getting musical shapes, and then we would split and confer on the phone over the next day or conceivably 2 days, and then come back together with sketches, fuller sketches, and start fitting them together. Much of our time was spent in doing crossword puzzles and playing word games, because Lenny likes that as much as I. And just sort of getting the marriage going, which is what counts in collaboration. Also, at that time, I was very young and very frightened. And I had distinctly different ideas on what a song should be than Lenny, particularly on what the lyrics should be. Lenny tends to like what I would call capital P poetic lyrics, poesy. And I tend to like conversation. But I recognized that the idea of the show was a highly heightened form of reality, and that simple conversation would not work. Arthur, in fact, was making up his own language in libretto. One of the problems was that with West Side Story, though we were dealing with a very timely subject, juvenile gangs, and though indeed Jerry went to some gang dances in Brooklyn, we found that we realized that if we attempted to imitate the kind of art that was going on, by the time the show would get on, which would be a year hence at the earliest, that argument would go out of fashion because slang changes so quickly. And that the only way to prevent the show from being dated immediately was to make up our own street language, which is one of the things that stood the show in very good stead, because when you see it now, the only thing that's really dated is the subject matter, that is the idea of that kind of gang warfare, because it's quite different now. The language is not dated, and it's because it was always made up. It was made up entirely out of our own heads. So Lenny and I would discuss that at great length, and of course he was also anxious to use certain music that was currently popular among the gangs, but in a heightened form so that it wouldn't seem, if you just do a cha-cha, 20 years later, it's just a cha-cha, and it's like doing, the Charleston. It feels out of date. So he made it his own cha-cha. It is a cha-cha, but it's not really a cha-cha. And we would spend days talking, some days writing, and once, I think only once, I just wrote a lyric code and he said it musically. That was A Boy Like That. And once, he just handed me a piece of music, well, actually twice. He had written 2 pieces of music for Candide, which had then not been produced, but was about to be, and they'd been thrown out. One was Officer Crockett, I just said that lyrically, and the other one was a song called One Hand, One Heart, which had some emendations in Washington, but was usually written in just the two. Otherwise, everything was done together. And working with Julie was entirely reverse. Julie had never really written an integrated show before, and didn't quite understand it. And the first day we met, he handed me 13 chickens. Now, they were all cutouts from other shows and all that, just a sheet of music was delivered to me. And I thought I thought one or two vamps might be useful, but I said to him, let's try to write everything fresh for the show. And what I found most useful with Julie was to write a sample quatrain, or maybe even a whole chorus, with rhythmic notation, musical rhythmic notation, so you know where the stresses were. And he liked that, so that I sort of set the pattern and then he followed it, which is the way, as you probably know, Rogers and Hammerstein work. Hammerstein had the lyric and Rogers said it. And that's essentially what happened with Gypsy. When I write myself, it's the constant confidence thing. I write a little bit of a lyric, a little bit of a tune. Generally, what I do when I write my own stuff is get a rhythmic accompaniment or a musical atmosphere before I even dare to get to a refrain line of what it's about, just to get a notion of what the feeling of the music should be and how it will heighten or underscore it. And then I try to work towards some kind of refrain line, which usually consists of making a lot of notes, sort of free form, free association on yellow pads, and just jotting down anything that comes into my head. Problem, as any of you who are writers know, is that you tend to censor as your pencil hits the paper because you say, oh, I can't say that, that's just too embarrassing or something like that. If you censor that way, you never get to the good ideas. You have to have the courage to put down on a piece of paper, knowing that nobody will ever see it, just anything that comes into your head, because out of that, you will get a phrase, or something that will spark you into something a little better than I love you, or whatever it is that you're saying. And the only way you can get freshness is to work through the cliches, at least I find that. So I just jot down useful phrases, and eventually music and the lyric starts to coalesce, and you get a refrain idea, you get perhaps a melodic idea that you want to set as a refrain idea, and it starts working hand in hand, and it's just a matter of fitting the pieces together. The form is harder. I found that easier when I had somebody to discuss it with. What I do now is I discuss it with the librettist, and to a certain extent. But after that, I'm on my own. The form is much the hardest part to how long it should be, how the sections should interlock, how they should deal with each other. Span and compass is much the hardest part of writing a sustained piece. And even if it's just a 3-minute song, you're trying to hold somebody's attention for 3 minutes, that's not so easy. So that's the essential difference. Lenny and I did a lot of this and a lot of endless conversation, most of which was probably not necessary. We both like to talk a lot. Julie and I did almost no talking at all because we don't talk the same language. He's a very shorthand fellow. He's quite articulate, but his mind works so fast that his tongue can't get to it. And so his sentences start with a subject. By the time the predicate comes, you've totally lost what he's saying. He's got so many subordinate clauses in everything he says, and you don't know exactly where you are. The best thing working with Julie, and he liked it too, was just to give him a sort of assignment, and then he would do it. And if he had quibbles with it or worried about it, then we would discuss it. But we always could discuss something specific and say, I wish this phrase could be shorter, or I wish I could expand this, or can you put in another line here, or can we change the rhyme scheme here, or something like that. But seldom were there any extended discussions. The extended discussions on Gypsy were, I held the right there, and all the songs, together. Also, it wasn't what Julie was interested in. He wants assignments. He likes to write. He's very fertile, and he doesn't need much time to write, but he needs the protection of knowing there's an assignment. He doesn't like to talk a lot about the stuff because he gets lost himself. That's the essential differences between those two. That was pretty much the way I worked with Rogers on the Light Walls too. He likes assignments. I think that came from the years with Hammerstein. As you probably know, when he wrote with Hart, he wrote the music first and Hart set most of the music. But when he wrote with Hammerstein, it was exactly the reverse, and I think he liked that. And I would give him lyrics. Occasionally he would present me with a tune or an entire chunk of music, but usually it was just the reverse. When I do it myself, it generally starts with a musical atmosphere and then works to the lyric and then back to the music.
Since you
since you brought this up, could you give us a précis of Oscar Hammerstein's teachings of that afternoon?
No. Well, incidentally, there's a biography of him just about to come out, if anyone is interested. I wrote a preface to it. So, yeah, I think we'll do one. And it's just the facts of his life and his career. It's a very straightforward biography. But as a reference book, it will probably be very good. It's, I don't think, particularly well written book, but it's all the facts are there and they're correct because all the survivors are still surviving. That's why we don't want it done now. She said, I want a book written while we're all still alive. Correct and misinformation. Let's say, I would say the major thing he taught me was has to do with the fact that a song is in integrated musicals. We're talking about a specific kind of music. Has to be a little wonderful play. It must have a statement and a development and a conclusion. And the scene where the person's singing it must be in a different place when they finish singing the song than they were when they began. There must be a sense of motion, or else the song is unnecessary, and you don't bother to write it. Now, that's not true for certain kinds of shows, but it's certainly true for the R&A shows. And it wasn't until years later that I realized there were other ways to write very good songs. As Bert Shevlock pointed out to me when we were writing for him, he said, has it ever occurred to you that Cole Porter made his entire career out of writing songs that move no place? And I said, oh, yes. He said, it's just there for different kinds of shows. But for a so-called dramatic musical, you have to have emotion within the song, or else the audience senses the stillness. They still may give a standing ovation because you slow it down for 8 bars at the end and raise it a half tone, and everybody applauds and stands their feet. But it's all over Broadway now, but it's not my kind of song, and I always find it cheap. That's one thing. The other thing is to make every word count. There are only 60 or so words in the lyric, so when you have a bad word, it's the equivalent, practically the whole scene in a play, or certainly the whole soliloquy. He said every word has got to be emotions. Really, you have to be careful of what you're saying in every way, shape, or form. He said also that clarity was the most important thing too, that an audience must understand, and this is one of the problems with trick rhyming is it gets in the way of the audience's understanding. Which incidentally has always been my objection to people like Lorenz Hart, which is that the ear doesn't, he's having such fun with the words too often that the ear doesn't really pick up what the tone is because he's violated it in order to get the rhyme. And that's one of the reasons that Hammerstein's rhymes are so plain and simple for the most part. It happened to be also something that interests him. I'm obviously much more interested in the rhyme, and I like it, but when I do trick or complex rhymes, I try never to do them at the expense of the clarity of the song. It's very important because songs exist in time, and sitting in an audience, you never get a chance, as opposed to poetry, let's say, to go back over it. So if it doesn't hit the ear with the exact periodicity that you want, that allows the ear of a stranger to know exactly what's going on, then the stranger is lost, the listener is lost, and turns off. And by the time he figures out, oh, I see, that sentence was about her, you're on to the 5th line, he's already lost 2 lines. Clarity is supremely important in this kind of writing. And one of the problems with working out trick rhymes is that they tend to distract the ear. So the best kind of trick rhymes are sort of hidden trick rhymes. There's a very complicated rhyme scheme in a song in a company called Ladies Who Lunch. It's very, very intricate, but it doesn't sound like it. It does give it a polish, and the ear unconsciously gets it, but the triple rhymes in each couplet, nobody ever gets except on examination of the song. That's why I need good rhyming, because the polish is there, and the ear senses it, but nobody in the audience hesitates for a second to understand exactly what the woman's saying. And it might as well be written without a rhyme in that sense. I'd say those are the major things he taught me, and he did it just through examples of what I'd written, because I was violating all these things right, left, and in between. He also told me, although on a subsequent day, he said, you must learn to write what you feel, not what I feel. Because he used to say I then proceeded to write songs about willows weeping and larks praying. Never believed in larks praying or willows weeping. But I was trying to be good. I was imitating him. He said, don't. You don't believe this. I believe it. He said, I write it because I believe it. He said, I know a lot of people think I'm just giving a lot of sentimental nonsense. Not true. I really believe all this stuff. He said, but you don't. He said, don't write what I write. Write what you think. And I I said, well, I've never fallen in love. How am I going to write a love song? He said, don't write a love song. If you haven't fallen in love, don't write one. Or get so involved with the character that you can feel what the character is feeling. In that case, you can write a love song for that character. It doesn't have to be your love song, but get inside the character and understand what the character is doing. And he said, you know, you don't have to experience everything to write it. You have to experience what the character is feeling. That's really important. And if you can't, then that's also quite a hard thing to do, unless you're a good playwright to work with. Then you're in trouble. I think that's essentially what you covered that afternoon. I think the structural thing is the thing that impressed me the most. That is the idea of play, of the notion of the movement of a song from point A to point B. And that I always have in some way or another. Now, I've written other kinds of songs for other kinds of forms. One of the things that was fun to write in form, for example, although I found that much the most difficult score that I ever to write because it violated everything. It was Bert Chevallow's idea, and I said, I don't know why I need songs in this, because this is, you know, a perfectly terrific farce. I'm talking about the plots of the plays, and we're going to mash something together. What will songs serve as? And he said, as respites from laughter. He said, that's what they served as 2,000 years ago, and that's, and I said, but I don't know how to do that. He said, if you come up through nightclub training, you understand exactly. He said, and that's when he talked about Cold Water. And that's a slow Cold Water could like that. Understood. And in fact, all those songs, or most of those songs, don't go anywhere at all. They state an idea and then restate it. And I used Porter as my model. And when Porter restates an idea, as opposed to most other lyric writers, he invents on the invention of the invention of each song. It's clever and clever as it goes along, so that your interest is kept up. I'm talking about his good songs. A song like Let's Do It. Your interest is kept up by the fact that he's always got a new variation you hadn't thought of.
Everybody ought to know me.
Oh, well, free is the one. Free is a total variation on the idea of freedom, and that's really the best actually example of the show. Everybody Made is one too. Although the one reason it only goes on, well, it shouldn't. It was written as a one-chorus song, so I didn't think I could get past one chorus. It was the only number that worked out of town, so they asked me to expand it into 3 choruses, and I just about made it canter, but it's pretty thin. It's you know, it's an okay song, but it doesn't really invent on the invention. Same thing was true with Company. Those were essentially static songs. But that is a kind of review. Again, we were experimenting with form. But most of the other shows I've written, certainly kind of prototypical ones like West Side and Gypsy, you will find the songs go someplace. That it is something is happening to the character or the situation by the time the song is over. That wasn't there before. That's crucial, I think, when you're writing a show that attempts to tell a story or a plot in an ordinary way. Crucial that the audience will not feel that the song is interrupted, or they will be less gripped by the story, even if they're enjoying the song.
When you get into character, do you do it strictly by going according to the book, or do you try to do some research or something on the character or the situation yourself?
Well, the only kind of research you can do on an author's invented character is talk to the author, and I do that a lot. You know, if I think there are aspects of the character, I remember I had a lot of trouble pinning down the Barbara Barry character in Company, Sarah. I just didn't understand what made her funny or why she was interesting. And George had something very specific in mind, and so he started to tell me over the phone the kind of shoes she would wear, the kind of clothes she would wear, what she would eat, and where she would go in the evening. He really knew her life because he's an actor, and there's no coincidence that 60% of the great playwrights were actors to begin with, because they understand exactly that they research a character by figuring out everything about the character's past, present, future, and what, you know, the lifestyle. And once he had done that, I was able to write for her. It was also true of the Elaine Stritch character, which I sort of grasped, but didn't quite. The first song I wrote, he felt was wrong. And he was always very timid about criticizing the songs, but he just knew that something was wrong with the song I first wrote. I thought I caught it perfectly. He told me why, specifically. I missed some points that were implicit in the writing but not explicit. But she was a character he knew into. So that kind of research, yes, absolutely, and that you can only do talking with the author. I try to act the characters as I write. I really try to get into their heads, and I try to be an actor playing that part and finding out what they'll say next. And the result is quite often I'll expand certain areas that the librettist didn't even think of, and didn't have in mind, which gives a kind of surprise and richness to the song. Because you don't want a character just to sing the way they've spoken and tell you things that you knew already, even to do. You want to discover something about it, as you say. So it has the weight of a new scene. Because the song has to be like a new scene. It doesn't just have to be in the middle or end. It has to delight you or surprise you or do something that makes the scene worth writing. Otherwise, there again, it isn't worth writing anymore. An unnecessary scene is worth writing. So that kind of research I do all the time.
And even you find that's with the characters who are somewhat foreign, like the juvenile gangs in West Side Story.
Well,
Juvenile from New Yorker.
Well, it's funny. You see, that for the reasons I described earlier, we decided that the research was no good. As a matter of fact, I'll take a little anecdote. Jerry Rock. There was one thing in West Side Story, when we were opening in Washington, that Jerry had taken from one of his dances he'd gone to. Gone to a dance where all the male members of the gang gave their girls roses. It was a Puerto Rican gang. And, I'm sorry, the girls gave the men roses and the men put them in their cuffs. Those were the days of cuffs. And so Jerry thought that would look terrific on the stage. So the dance came over and dress rehearsal. All the girls presented roses to the men. They all put them in their cuffs. They started to do the big circle in the number, and as it got faster and faster, the stage started to look like a funeral home. Roses were flying all over. Every time they would kick a rose would go off and hit somebody in the face and land on the floor. It was totally impractical and didn't work at all. So we cut that out. So the one authentic thing was cut from the show before. There's no point in doing that kind of authenticity, because as Arthur pointed out, he said, then let's go out and make a documentary. You really want to do something about juvenile gangs in New York? Let's go out with a camera and do it. He said, that's not what this is. So you can't do that kind of research even when you're basing your show on real people. You must. Musical is a poetic form. You've got to. The theater is a poetic form. You've got to use imagination. Documentation just doesn't work on the stage. Certainly not in the musical, because people are singing, which is the reverse of reality. There are such things as realistic plays, as opposed to naturalistic plays. Where the sink actually pours water. That's a certain kind of play. Then you can't have somebody pour real water out of the sink and then sing at you. It's silly.
I'm probably one of the few people, probably the only person in this room that saw Frogs at Yale. And
I saw it.
That's
I
true.
saw it.
Oh, good. And there were more. I wanted to ask you how you felt that fit into your work as overall, if you viewed it as an odd duck or...
It was an odd duck. I did it as a favor for Bert. What the history of the Frogs is that in 1941, shortly before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Bert did a production at Yale. He was, I believe, head of the dramatic there. He was a hired man, but he worked with the students. And in his days at Yale, he did a one-act Roman comedy, and he did a musical version of a one-act musical of a specific Roman comedy, Rag of Warrior, which is what led to Forum eventually. And he also did a production of the Frogs in the Yale swimming pool, which caused such a sensation that the New York Times actually wrote an editorial about it. And then the war took over a couple of weeks later, so nothing further was heard of it. Yale asked him, in person of Robert Brook, to do it again a few years ago. And Bert had done a big favor for me, which was coming. He was in England, came over to stage the tribute union because it was in a mess, and it was going to be a disaster. And he came in for 2 months and worked it out and made the show what it was, which was a very, very good benefit. And I'd asked him to do it because he's terrific at benefits. He's done a lot of them. It's exactly what a benefit he should be, what the way it should be, and how you handle actors and put them for one day. And I was so grateful to him that I said, usually over grateful as I said, anything you want. I appreciate it so much. Anything you want. He said, well, Bruce Steve's asked me to do the Frog, would you do it? And I thought, my God, I'm not Roman comedy on it. But I did it, and it was interesting. I wish we'd had more time to write it. Also, the way things are done up at Yale, which is shameful, is typified by our show. We never got the entire cast and orchestra together until opening night when they invited the critics. That was our first rehearsal to the entire cast. And that's the way Bruce Steve works. He said, just a work in progress, just a work in progress. Unbeknownst to us, he had invited Walter Kerr and Gus Sauer and all those people. And self-aggrandizement is what Yale is about. But it was fun to work on. By about the 5th performance, it started to shape up and we knew what was wrong, so we rewrote it. And it's now in published form with our rewrites. Bert changed the entire debate at the end, which is now just wonderful. It's a wonderful debate at the end, because it was terrible up at the end. And we knew why it was terrible, we couldn't make it work.
So the score that is around
It's mostly there. I cut a couple things. I added a song. I added a Shakespeare song, a song for Shakespeare to sing. And I added.
Because I didn't remember that, and I seen it in the
No,
store.
yeah, no, that was added for a published version, and I changed the whole second half of the hymn to Dionysus because I didn't like it, and I simplified some of the frogs, chorus, and cut the song, and that was it. Doesn't have quite enough songs. It should have like a number one, I think.
Would you consider it a musical or a play with music?
Oh no, I'm glad that those terms don't mean anything.
Well,
Goes on in this class. I'm don't wait.
We're still trying to decide what's operetta and what's musical
Don't
comedy.
don't decide. Don't. They're late. You know, it's like doctors are jargon. It's not important. They're musicals. Anything, songs. You know. I wouldn't try to categorize that. It's a musical. I mean, I want the presence of music, though. Yes, sir.
This is a friendly question.
Okay.
There seems to be a preoccupation today of drawing on the plays or the works of yesterday. Is this preoccupation a reflection of the spiritual emptiness of an affluent society? It seems that the life of a new play has an existence that lasts as long as the mating of a fly. Is it possible that the writers today have little new to say? What are some of your thoughts on this one?
No, I think it's very simple. A good play is very hard to write, and a good musical is twice as hard. And you need a good original musical, because it not only has all the difficulties of the bastardization of the form, but the form itself is so difficult to write. I think playwriting is the hardest form of literary endeavor, including poetry. I mean, I think it's a miracle when you play that's written. I don't know how people do it. To sustain somebody's interest for 2.5 hours and have a sense of motion and climax and all that stuff, I just don't know how people do it. I think that's why few originals are written. They're just too hard to write. And you might as well start, therefore, with a story that you think is good and solid, meaning a plot or a story even, and work on it, particularly if you can transform it and make a new alchemy out of it, as in the case of West Side Story. You know, which as far as I'm concerned, West Side Story is an original. It isn't any more than Romeo and Juliet was an original. That wasn't either. And what's good enough for Shakespeare certainly is good enough for anybody else. And he took, as you well know, stories that other people had written, sometimes plays other people had written, and made them his own. And that's swell. You know, it's fine. He picked good stories. His taste was terrific. And I think the same thing holds true of musicals. I think it's just very, very hard to come up with an original. Company, which is one of the best originals I know, didn't start as a musical. I think if it started a musical, it wouldn't have been what it is. We took some unproduced plays. The only difference was they hadn't been produced, but they were already written works. No, I don't think it has anything to do with spirituality. I think if you want to argue or talk about that, that has to do with the state of the theater. And at the moment, in America anyway, I find there's a kind of renaissance. I think a lot of playwrights have a lot to say, and I think that's why suddenly there's a spate of young playwrights who people are taking seriously, and we're getting their work performed, which makes it even more important. And I'm not talking about light comedies. I am talking about American Buffalo, The Shadow Box, and things like that, and Gemini, and they're finding audiences, not big audiences for straight plays, not big audiences, again, meaning serious play. But they find a sizable enough audience so they can run for a number of months and won't get a chance to see it. Anybody who's seriously interested in it gets a chance to see it, then it closes one night. And I think if there's any correlation between that and spiritual emptiness, then I'd say something's filling the vacuum suddenly. And one of them, there's no reason to, I can't figure out why, it's just that, as in the 50s in England, a whole generation of playwrights has something to say. Generally, I think that comes from like isometric exercise. I think they're responding to pressures equally. I think what's happened in this country in the last 20 years is that our problems have coalesced so that people can now write about them. I think that during the Vietnam War years, we were all in such a state of horror, guilt, and shock that everybody was flying off madly in all directions, and there wasn't anything to put down on paper except to say, it's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible. Which is not enough to write a play about. And now there's some sense of the country has a personality now. And I think it's being reflected in its writing. Whereas England, which over the last, certainly during the late 60s, early 70s, was, when it was all sinking into the ocean, suddenly there wasn't any good playwriting going on. I'm exaggerating, obviously there was some, but there was no sense of that renaissance that happened with the so-called angry young men Because everybody in the 50s knew exactly where they were, what they were fighting against, and what they were responding to, which is, for God's sakes, don't you see what's happened to the empire? And they wrote plays about it. But then it happened to the empire, and there was nothing to write plays about it. Now they're just beginning again, although it's still very, I think, the center will not hold. It's very strange, the playwright is going off at all directions. The best play I saw in London was a play on women's work. Let's get somebody else.
Has there been any show where you had at least momentary difficulty in harmonizing the lyrics with the music?
You mean making them come out together?
Yeah.
No, that's a matter of technical expertise, and I'm not sure. I mean, there's always problems. It never comes easy. I'm a slow and painful writer. I write painfully. I'm very slow. It's a very hard technique, but I know a lot about it, and I know when it doesn't work, so I know enough not to play that or to even put it down on paper. But it does come partly from experience and partly from skill, and that's my talent. My talent is for, whereas also my talent's primarily oral, and I'm very tuned in the way people talk, which is why I like to write contemporary stuff, and why I have been writing non-contemporary stuff to stretch my muscles. It's much harder for me to devise a speech for a Japanese musical, or devise an Mid-Atlantic speech for a night music. They're not my natural. I'm a New Yorker, and I'm absolutely 20th century, and my ears tune that way. And the reason I do those shows is to force myself to do something that isn't easy. Things like Gypsy and Company are much easier for me because people are talking the way I talk. So I'm deliberately, the next show I'm doing takes place in Victorian London, about which I know nothing, and I'm finding it impossible to find the speech. But it's stimulating me because when I do find it, it's my own. It's my own version of Cockney, or my own version of Victorian upper class, my own version of Dickens.
Sweeney Todd is this?
Yes, it's called Sweeney Todd. It's an old English play.
The Demon Barber.
The Demon Barber of Fleet Street. It's a grinding mill. It's about blood. It's the world's first sick music. Really sick, really sick. I played the first few songs for Hal, who knows the play. He blanched visibly. He had no idea what it was going to turn out this way. But anyway, yes.
One of the comments that's often expressed, by the way, I preface this by saying this is a friendly question.
I understand. I know what the question is, but go ahead and say it.
Could I preface this also by asking you to speak just a little louder?
Oh, sure.
All right.
It's been a long day. I usually speak very
One of the comments that's often expressed about or stated about your musicals is that they are so hard to listen to. Now, it requires too much of an attention span. Do you do this intentionally, or is this just a byproduct of your talent, or what?
No, I write what I like to hear and what I like to stand in the back of the theater and look at. I mean, every writer writes what he likes. I like plays with some density. I like songs with some density, and I'm fully aware that it's making demands on an audience that's been fed pap and has been fed pap all the time. No fun thing. What am I going to do? I can't quote right down to their level, because it doesn't interest me, and I wouldn't know how to do it, really, But obviously I'm not trying to show off, and I'm not trying to make people baffled. I'm trying to communicate. I'm trying to make people have a good evening, but I'm also trying to make people have an evening that they're a little richer by than when they came in, instead of just an evening out, because they want an evening out, let them stay at home with the television set, or go to one of the other musicals, which they do by droves, and they don't go to mine very much. And I understand that, and that's the price I pay, and it makes me angry, but after all, to be very pretentious about it, that's what an artist's job is. An artist's job is to stimulate people and make them argue, make them think. That's what art is, as opposed to commercial crap. I mean, that's just what it is. And as long as people will allow me to have my musicals on, I'll keep doing it. I'm not starving in a garret. I've written enough that has touched enough people so that I live very nicely, but I'm never going to leave the air out of it, and that's okay too. It does make me angry when I see terrible stuff getting praised by not only the audiences but by the critics. We're on the same level as the audience, and who are always frightened by anything new, and as most people are. My idea is frighten people. And have for millennia, and will continue to do so. And all you do is think about the Impressionist exhibition in 1896 when we're always going to, broke the windows, or what happened on the first night of Rite of Spring, which is played in every concert in the country. everybody taps their feet and says they want to be. All they have to do is have Disney draw a cartoon for those two. So, I'm aware of that, and I know you were going to ask that, but, it's neither conscious nor unconscious. It's just one of those.
Okay, one brief irrelevant question and then a serious one. There's a rumor that you can confirm, is it your voice that says you ain't getting 88 cents from euros on
Yeah, the reason is what happened was the stage manager forgot it. And you see, when you have a cast recording session, you only invite the people who sing. We had a number of straight men who played the comics and the burlesque part, and also doubled in other parts of the show. One of them was that of the father. Nobody remembered to call him because he had a singing part. Came time to record the number, and he wasn't around. There was nobody to do it, and so Goddard Dickerson pushed me out on the floor. And I read the line as richly as I could because I didn't like that number very much at that moment. And so I said, you ain't getting 88 cents from me, Rose. I could hear it come out of my mouth. We only got us recorded. And even she looked at me and said, look, you don't have to overact. But yeah, that's my voice. That was just because he had me call. There was nobody else to do it.
It jars me because it's a wonderful album. You hear this young guy playing voice.
Well, the terrible thing was, you see, it being a solo number, everybody else was gone. I mean, it was only Ethel and the recording engineer and Dolly Lieberson and me and the orchestrator and Julie.
The more serious question is, how much control or influence did you have in the making of the films of Gypsy and Forum?
Oh, none. You just take the money.
How did you feel about those films?
You just take the money. And West Side, too. You don't have any control. There's no way you can, and it's not even worthwhile complaining about, because if I were a movie producer, I wouldn't want to give writers control over such matters as casting and sets and things like that. The picture never get made. If I were buying a piece from you, you'd say, gee, I don't like Barbra Streisand. What am I going to do? So you've got to sign your own select. Once you do that, then let them do it. They're no good. At least Forum tried to be a movie. Lester at least tried to make a movie instead of just photographing a play. He ignored the major function of Forum. He ignored what makes Forum as good as it is, which is its plot. It is my considered opinion, I've read a lot of farces. It's my considered opinion it's the best farce ever written. I think it makes Feydeau look like a tiger, because it's much better plotted than Feydeau, much more elegant. I've lived on Forum, that's my primary source of income, because as we sit here, there are 3 productions that are going on somewhere in the United States, in some high schools or wherever. Anybody can perform it. That play is as funny when performed by kids as it is when performed by professionals. As funny when performed by amateurs, because it is so rock solid. And what Lester did was ignore the plot for the individual gags, some of which were very funny. I mean, I think it's very funny when a dove carries a message across the way and only the message is on a piece of stone, so the dove plunges to the floor. I mean, that's not terribly funny. But it doesn't help you understand what the relationship between villain and hero is. And without that, there's no tension. And since tension is the basis of farce, there was nothing funny in the movie. By the time the chase occurred at the end, if you saw the movie, it was the most boring chase in the world, because you didn't know who was after what or why, and you didn't care. And on the stage, the chase was screamingly funny because everybody was in desperate trouble. And you cared. You didn't want him to be discovered by her, you didn't want her to be discovered by him, you didn't want him to discover Bethany. And Gypsy is just, that's just flat. It was theoretically a very good idea, I think, to cast Rosalind Russell, but she was curiously juiceless, and Rose is a juicy character. You've got to feel with Rose that she's sexual. You just got to feel that. It's not play in the show, but it's the undercurrent. Because otherwise, why does anybody go along? Why does Herbie go along with this monstrous woman? You've got to feel that there's something juicy going on there. Because otherwise it makes him out to be a fool, and therefore, when he walks out on her or leaves her alone, it doesn't mean anything, which it didn't mean. You can't play Rose just like a monster. Both Ethel Merman and Angela Lansbury are juicy ladies. Bring that onto the stage. Rosalind Russell doesn't.
Have you seen the Little Night Music?
Oh, I worked on it quite a lot.
When's it coming out?
I don't know. The last I heard was we got a distribution deal 2 weeks ago. I haven't heard another word. The problem with Night Music, contrary to all the rumors, is that the Viennese government put up the money for the picture. They are now, the cultural part of the city of Vienna is now broke, and they want their money back quick. They want to saturate booking, and the American producer does not. And they're co-partners, and therefore the American producer has done what he considers a very smart thing, which is to overprice the movie for the distributors, so it can't be sold to the Viennese, given that we'll have to sell their share to him. That's what's going on politically. What it's doing is holding up the release. We sneak previewed the movie out in Queens about 3-4 months ago. It was very good sneak preview. It's a mixed bag. The movie is quite good. The cast is wonderful, and it looks terrific. There are some things in it that are clumsy, but nothing dreadful. It's a nice movie. If you like the show a lot, you may be disappointed in the movie. But if you don't have any particular feeling about the show, it's a very nice movie, and some of it's quite lovely.
I want to go back to something that you were talking about a little bit before, and you said that it was so difficult to write a musical that it was easier to begin with a published property. Is another reason that it's considerably easier to sell a musical to a producer that's based on a published property?
No, not unless it was based on, so I'm sure they had no trouble selling Exodus if it closed in the war, or it closed 5 years, something like that. But no, not unless it's a really pre-sold property with an appeal. No producer is going to find anything attractive without producing an obscure, a musical based on an obscure novel or short story or even movie. If it's, some wildly famous property, that's a whole other matter.
As I looked up in Gypsy, when you were talking about it before, I just took a quick glance. It's based on the memoirs of
Yes, but
Gypsy
it's not
Rose.
really. It's Arthur made up his own story because he realized when reading the book, he thought something struck him funny about it. He didn't want to do it anyway. And then he went and interviewed Gypsy Rose Lee, and she contradicted everything in the book that she'd already put down. And he suddenly realized she was making it up. She makes up everything. She made it up, and then he checked with June Havoc, and she had an entire, according to June Havoc, and then subsequently wrote a book, Madame Rose preferred Gypsy to June, and that's why June went off and got married at the age of 13 and all that, because her mother was lavishing all her attention and affection on Louise. According to Gypsy Rose Lee, it was just the reverse. So, he suddenly realized what that story could say, which is about how children become responsible for their parents. It's all in the last scene, and that's what makes the show more than just backstage chat. That's that last scene. And once he found that, then he got enthusiastic. But that, nobody ever heard of that book. It wouldn't have made a difference in selling it. No, that never enters into it, I think, unless a producer buys a hot property and thinks of it like.
But Golda is based on something that was a pre-sold
Well, that's
character.
yes, that's possible, I suppose. I'm sure there are some famous examples that you can think of, but based on really successful best-selling, that's usually what's invited. Back there.
Yes, in Forum, the song You're Lovely, how was that originally intended? The comic key or the ballad?
No. It was originally intended just for the drag. I had another love song for Hero and Affiliate in New Haven, and like all the other songs in the show, it was greeted with like one of the many that was and I'd written Lovely for the drag act, and I think Bert suggested that Lovely could be rewritten and used for Hero and Affiliate, which I did. And it was a nice idea. Though I'm very fond of the song that was cut out, I think it was a very smart movie because it made it twice as funny when it came back as a reprise than when it just came fresh. Yes.
When you're out of town in Triumph, is there a rewriting process?
Oh,
Music? Or
well,
is it easier to throw out and start again?
No, what it is it amounts to throwing out and starting again, but that's what I call rewriting. Rewriting is the other end of the pencil. That's what rewriting is. This is an old aphorism in show business, phrase that plays are rewritten. I think it's probably true. One of the things that happens, you see, out of town, everybody expresses a great deal of wonder all the time that so many of the best songs and shows are the ones that are written out of town. They think that's a result of pressure, and isn't it wonderful how writers write their best stuff under pressure? That's not what it's about. It's the fact that you see it all on the stage. You see not only the character you've been writing for a year, but that character as played by Brenda Smith. And the way Brenda Smith plays it gives you a whole take on it, and you know exactly what to write for her. So that when it comes time to write a new song for her out of town, so much of your homework is done because you know the way it's going to sound in her voice, you know the way she looks, in the clothes, in the lights, in the situation. And theoretically, all plays should be written that way. That is to say, you should be out of town for years, and then you'll write a terrific show. And in fact, that's the way Brecht worked. You know, he would write his play, put it on with his company, they would rehearse it for 6 months, including all the scenery, all that. He'd fiddle and tinker with it, and on more than one occasion, at the end of 6 months, he said, okay, we'll start all over again, I now know what it should be. And everything would be thrown out, and he started all over again, because he was able to observe exactly what would happen. That's essentially what, how Chorus Line is made. It gave Michael a chance to look at what he was working with, and constantly fix and change with living material, which is the ideal way to do either a play or a musical. Shakespeare wrote for a company. He knew who he was writing for. It's very important when you know that you've got whatever his name is, Garrick, or whatever his name is, or the leading man in that company, when you know that he's the man who's going to be playing the next play you write, you say, he'd be very good as that king of Denmark, as that prince of Denmark, or whatever, you know. It's terribly important. Unfortunately, it's a luxury nobody can do. But as you may have read or heard, it's now an anecdote, I wrote Send in the Clowns in 2 nights because I saw Glynis Jones play the scene. I didn't have any idea, and I didn't think she should sing the song. But the way Hal staged the scene and presented it to me, I thought it was the man's scene. He had directed it, so it was the woman's scene, because he wanted a number for her. He wanted an impulse in the scene. And with very little rewriting on Hugh's part, the scene became hers. I took one look at it and said, oh, I see what you mean. And it was an easy song to write. I wrote it for Glynis Johns playing that part. I would not have written that song for anybody else playing it. Glynis Johns can't sustain notes. So I thought, the first thing I got to do is get a song with short phrases and plenty of time for her to breathe in between. So it's got to go da-da-da-da, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, da-da-da-da. So, because she can't sustain. But I wouldn't have written, Ethel Merman playing the part, it would come out something else. But it's an example of how easy it is once you know exactly what your living material is. And I wish that would happen all the time. Do a lot better work.
And then what do you do with what's thrown out? Do you file it and
Yes,
save it?
I'm a string collector, yes. I have every envelope I've ever written, and I'm also, because of my Germanic background, they're all neat boxes, you can look up anything, if you want to know anything, you want to know what the original form of anything, like there's a box that says, cutouts, originals, things like that, for each show. So, yes, I save everything, and rarely reuse it, but occasionally a musical notion. I'll say, gee, I remember who it was, and I'll look it up, and I'll say, yeah, it's almost, but it doesn't quite make it. But it's nice to have all that stuff, particularly when you never know. For example, when we were writing West Side, I always was furious, not furious, that's overstating it, I was disturbed that Jerry Robbins insisted that America be done all by girls, because the idea of America, the song America, was that it should be an argument between Bernardo and Anita, for 2 main characters, and expressing their different feelings, and it was something that was going to help propel the plot, was that conflict between them. And Jerry said, it's got to be an all-girl number. I said, why? He said, I just want a number here. I said, but there's only one girl, I can't have an argument. He said, then create another character. So we created a straw figure of one of the other girls, who, had a little squeaky voice, and was the antagonist in the song, so that Anita could get all the punchline. When it came time to make the movie, Jerry said, that idea you had about, running it between Bernard and Eva, he said, I'd like to do that for the movie. I didn't have to write all the lyrics. I just went back to the file box and looked up my original quatrain, polished them a little bit, and shoved them into the movie. And it was a help.
Did you have any unusual problems with West Side Story?
No, there was one of the smoothest shows in history, I think, and if not the smoothest. We opened out of town. The problems I came with writing, the 2 years of the writing, it was much in the way of difficult.
I'm bringing this up because I thought it was amusing, and maybe everyone would like to know that it started East Side Story.
Oh, that, no, well, yes, long before I ever became a performer, 10 years earlier, Jerry Robbins came to Arthur Lawrence and said, that they were good friends, and I think they were going to work on a musical together and hadn't been that. He said, I'd love to do a contemporary version of Romeo and Juliet with the Jews and the Catholics on the Lower East Side. And Arthur said then it'll be Amy's Irish Rose set to music. So it was dropped for 10 years. And then one day, Arthur was sitting reading a newspaper in California, and he read about Jews and delinquents, and Jerry happened to be in town. And he said, that idea about Romeo and Juliet? How would you like to do it with white gangs and non-white gangs in New York and use what's going on there? And Jerry said, terrific. And that's it. So it was never officially called East Side Story, but it was about the Lower East Side. But it was about the East Side. It wasn't really about
2 years to put it together?
Yeah, 2 years with a 6-month hiatus. I had buried some money, But that's why we did it, though. Lenny did Candide, which came to fruition during those 2 years, and at the same time, coincidentally, Arthur got a producer for his play, Clearing in the Woods. So we decided to split forces for 6 months, and Jared and I directed those movies. And then I went off work for television, and then we all came back together. And it was, so it was about a year and a half of writing, which is a little more than visual. Yes.
When you were working on Gypsy, what kind of restrictions did Miss Marnie place on the writing?
None. We made that clear to her at the beginning. No, because we were worried about it. We were worried about it. And so we took her to a drink, for a drink one day. And Arthur said to her, I want you to understand something before we write this, if there's nothing right. He said, I'm not going to compromise on this character. This woman is a monster. He said, I'm going to try to make her an understandable monster. But she's a monster. And there's going to be nothing sympathetic about her at all that isn't inherent in the character. And I said, fine by me. And he said, really fine? She said, really. He said, okay. And she never let out a peep about any of the writing at all, except on one occasion. She had told me that I could change anything in the lyrics up until 1 week before opening in New York, and then no matter what, the show had to be frozen. She wanted 1 week of playing the same thing over and over again. And I said, that's more than reasonable, fine by me. 2 weeks before we closed in Philadelphia, I had always been disturbed by the transition into some people, which didn't seem to me to work from the dialogue. And I thought it needed, because it starts on a low note, and the speech that precedes it ends on a high note, in terms of vocal song. And I said to Arthur, I'd like to write a verse for that. He said, fine. So I did. A verse that started on a high pitch, and then gradually the anger went down, so she hit a low note, so then she could hit it with some people. She wouldn't do it. And he said, but it's 2 weeks before. She said, I wouldn't do it. And I found out why. It's because in the lyric, there was a line when she told her father to go to hell. And she did not want the audience hearing Ethel Merman for her first number tell her father to go to hell. And she never performed something properly. She always did that. She always swayed her hips a little bit, tapped her feet a little bit, and almost snapped her fingers to let you know with just good old Ethel Merman where she went to sing. I'm not exaggerating, but she wasn't playing the character. The reason was, it's psychological. She wanted the audience to remember, this is just the old Ethel Merman. She's going to commit some murders this evening, but it's your old, good-hearted Ethel Merman, the woman with a heart of gold. Once she was over some people, she played the part as intensely and honestly as she could. But she was always fake during that number, because she was so afraid the audience would dislike her. It didn't hurt anything badly, but always annoyed me. Yes.
I wonder if I could get an analysis of a very important period in your life in terms of the overall Broadway seasons. From around late 60s to mid 70s, there was a tremendous slump on Broadway. Of course, that was during some very good times for you, the Tony's Company and Follies and Little Night Music. I was wondering if you have any feelings about that time, why there was such an audience drop-off and why it changed around.
No, I don't really know why audiences are coming back now. I really don't. I don't think it has to do with the quality of the work at all. I think it must have something to do with the Vietnam War and the aftermath. I don't know. There was just no feeling of wanting to go to the theater. Now, it's much improved now. It's burgeoning much more, but it's still hardly in healthy shape. Broadway theater is not in healthy shape. It's just in a lot healthier shape than it was 5 or 10 years ago, but it's nothing like it in terms of new productions and how hard it is to raise money for shows and all that. It's worse than ever, as a matter of fact. It's just that more audiences are coming, and that's saying more bodies are filling more seats. A lot of it has to do with discount tickets. And I think maybe we're going through a period where people are getting a little tired of sitting home watching television, and they want an evening out. And so they got movies and theaters to go to. I can't analyze them any farther than that. I mean, I suppose I could sit and spin theories, but I wouldn't have any firm conviction. Do you have any sense of it? Do you know why?
Well, we asked this, or I asked this rather, of Mr. Thank you, Schoenfeld, 2 weeks ago. Now, quickly,
You'll never get one of his
famous. So much for the discount pass. And he, part of the reason he had assigned to the discount tickets He gave great emphasis to the efforts made by many people to clean up Times Square area.
And there's another thing too, because I was talking to him about it at lunch a couple of weeks ago. The other thing I forgot is that they have made a concerted and very important effort to make ticket buying easier. Through Ticketron, American Express, personal check, phone reservations, all of that. Theater going is easier now, which is always one of the things that held back, because who wants to just go to the box office and then find out that there are no tickets till the next 6 months? You've taken your lunch hour, or you've come in from Queens or from New Jersey, and there are no tickets available, and you don't want to go to a scalper and, pay $5 extra, and it's not worth the trip. But this way, if you can pick up a phone and say, do you have any tickets for next Monday? They say no, it saves your trip. What have you lost? A phone call. Do you have any tickets for next Thursday? Yes.
Another factor might be what was mentioned by, I suppose, your friend Tony Perkins on TV the other night, David Sussheim shows. The character of the audience has changed greatly over the last 10 or 15 years. It's much more relaxed crowd, if you will. They don't make reservations a great deal in advance. They come on that day.
Yes, also, a lot of the audience figures on Broadway are burgeoned by the influx of the black audience, which is never, a lot of stuff is written particularly geared for the black audience, and they're coming and they're enjoying it. And some of them are even going to some of the white middle class things as a result. They're spilling over a bit. But a lot of the theaters on Broadway are occupied by 90 to 100% black audiences. And those are all new bodies that have never been to the theater before and are enjoying it and coming back. And that's, I think, one of the reasons for the upped figures in terms of ticket sales. I think it's terrific, as long as it doesn't polarize. Yes?
I'd like to ask you something about regularity in terms of rhythm and rhyme. I don't know if you can make any kind of generalization about it. I know that some songs are quite regular, but some I noticed that you write, they do something that's repeat, and then it sort of goes into a very different kind of a rhythm and a different kind of a rhyme scheme, and it goes. When you're writing that, is that when you're writing the lyric first that you decide that you're going to need some variety in the song, and therefore you...
Usually, but...
Because if you wanted to, obviously you could do the whole thing in heroic couplets.
Well, the problem is setting heroic couplets would give you the most boring music in the world. Generally, lyrics that read very evenly are impossible to set. Just try it sometime. Just try to set something that's in iambic pentameter all the way through and see where you're going to get with the music. It's really difficult, really difficult. So you will find that most lyrics that sing well are very odd looking on the paper, and much simpler ones than the ones I write. But just take a look at a book of hard lyrics or quarter lyrics or anything like that. They're all abstract drawings, I do it partly for variety. Also, I like to have the character go through certain emotional changes in a song, so that what I was talking about earlier about making a little scene. And it seems to me that any kind of emotional veering or tonal veering in a song must be supported by a change in the texture of the song too, the texture of the lyric and how it relates to the music, so that it's variety in the deepest sense. It's variety in character, not variety for the ear, not variety for the fact that the ear is going to be working with rhythm. But I'll see if I can think of a good example. Well, you can take the opening of Company and the verse sung by the people and the chorus sung by Bobby all have essentially the same rhythmic basis, but they're quite different in texture because the people are all being smarmy and he's being heroic. I'm exaggerating, but there's a difference in tone between them, and yet it has to be one song. Not to be 2 seconds early. I'm trying to think of, Some People is a good example too, the break in which he gets excited at the release, and the words come out much faster than they do in other places. Generally, it's to support the tonal variety of the tone on subtextual, but it's not just for the ear. That's mechanical, too easy to do, and also very uninteresting. It's just an arbitrary change in mood. I think I could defend any of those changes. So I think I can tell you why I decided to do that.
Do you think that's, I'm sorry if I take up too much time,
That's right.
but do you think that there's a real difference in the sense of writing a theatrical song versus a popular song?
Oh, entirely, of course.
Where the popular has to be much more rhythmically regular?
I don't think it has to be rhythmically regular, except that pop music today is based on relentlessness. That's the idea of it. That's what's exciting to people. And that simply doesn't work very well in the theater, I find. I mean, it does, if you're writing, again, certain kinds of shows, if you're writing what I would call Las Vegas type shows, absolutely, the same thing holds true, and it's kind of true, you know, you do your chorus, goes into halftone each time, and then, I say, you know, you go into halftime, or you know, or you sometimes double it, but it's usually you go back to the cakewalk, and everything I say, incidentally, is about theatrical songwriting. I hasten to add, nothing I'm saying holds true of pop writing of any sort. This is all about this kind of writing. I'm sure that's right.
Martin Gottfried is often on the hobby horse that we should have our more popular musical modes on the Broadway stage, and that's why young people don't come, because we don't have enough rock musicals and so on. What's your reaction to Martin's attitude?
Well, what's wrong with that? He's perfectly right in theory. Wouldn't it be nice if? The problem is that rock in the theater simply does not work in terms of character at all, because rock takes character out of a song. What it does is give it a musical envelope that has nothing whatsoever to do with what's being sung, and all you have to do is look at attempts to do rock musicals that tell stories like Billy Budd to see what's wrong. And what Martin said in the best of all possible worlds would be true. It's impossible, because rock is anti-theatrical in terms of telling a story, not anti-theatrical in terms of a concert, but anti-theatrical in terms of telling a story. There's no variety in rock over an evening. There's a few kinds of forms, and you have to subordinate your characters to the forms. You can never get any richness of character and tell a story with any complexity or interest whatsoever using rock music.
There's musical energy and excitement, but it doesn't have many permutations.
Yeah, exactly. And it also doesn't have any real character. Rock music doesn't have character. The character of rock music is the rock music. Also, the character of rock music is amplification. Rock music does not exist without that. Folk
And it
rock
kills
does,
the lyrics.
Sometimes it does that, but the point is it's totally inhuman. It's, you know, and in terms of the kind of humanity that you deal with on the stage, which is to get into people and look at them, you know, in some detail, in some kindness. You can't look at people in detail in rock at all. Not at all. You can only state a thought. That's all you can do. And it's been tried, and it doesn't work. And he's dead wrong.
Do you feel, say, in your own composing or the work of others that you admire, that we are moving in a new direction? There's this idea that we always have to have progress in the arts, and we're looking for some new musical modes, new ways to do comedy. Do you feel that you're moving into any new area?
Every time I do a show, I try to do something that I haven't done before. I seldom repeated myself in terms of what the whole show is to be, and even the way of writing it. I was brought up, as I said earlier, on integrated musicals, and after Gypsy, I thought, okay, that's the last time I do that. Because I now know how to do that, so let's go on and find other things to do. And that's why I went into the twilight zone between review and book, as in Forerunner and Company. The only time I regret was do I hear a Wall Street Journal show I didn't particularly want to do. But that struck me as something, just a form that had it. So I'm certainly not moving in any direction. I'm moving in a number of directions, but each show I write is just an exploration of something else.
And yet some of the critics said that night music was the most charming of your shows because it returned to the form of operetta.
And made them so happy, They didn't have to think they got a little plot they could follow, and then she got the fella at the end, and it was just, everybody was happy. In fact, what I was doing was experimental, which is to see if there's any life in the old horse left of the operetta. And I think there is. I think that, however, you have to pick your story very carefully. But I thought it would be fun to see, because I happen to loathe operetta. I've always loathed. I don't know much about operetta. Every time I hear one, it makes my skin crawl. And I thought it'd be fun to see why. And I realized why. It was because it has to do with character.
Some people were very upset that you used actually the chorus in that. I thought it was devilishly clever and quite interesting.
I thought it was too.
Why did you decide to do that? Was it certain?
I wanted a variety of voices.
Dramatically other?wise?
When I first sat down and thought about it, I thought, how about a musical in which everything is either a solo or a duet? I wonder if I could get away with that. And I decided that over the evening, it would texturally be boring, just a little monotonous. I mean, very few people realize, for example, there's no chorus in Gypsy. And 9 of the songs, and I think there are 13, are sung either solo or in duet by Madame Rose. I mean, there's very little. There's only the little vaudeville numbers to give a variety, which indeed they do. Just to hear masked voices, even though there are only 6 little kids, is very, very good to get you away from the sound of Madame Rose. But there's certainly no rule for it. I just felt that in night music, that part of the idea of an operetta was close harmony. And I didn't want, 20 couples waltzing around on the stage who would come in for 2 numbers in the first act and 1 in the second. That seemed too old-fashioned. And also, I'm always bothered by choruses unless they're really singing something that is pertinent to what they're feeling and pertinent to the plot. And it's seldom that 20 people feel the same thing. If a building is falling down, they can all sing a chorus saying, "Look out, the building is falling down." That's what we would all do. So the building falling down. But it's very seldom that you can get 20 people with the same thought. So it always strikes me as silly. That doesn't mean I won't use one, because I think, well, I'm going to have a kind of chorus in the new show. But I'm going to try to avoid that.
But Pacific Overture, didn't that end with a chorus of modern times?
Yes, it was representing the country. Both Four Black Dragons and the end of that show represent the attitude of the country, not the attitude of individuals. So that chorus, if I had my way, there would have been 100 people on the stage. The idea is to say a country is singing, not individual characters, because that's a show that's not about characters anyway, but particularly, the major character is Japan. And so I wanted a chorus that would say at the beginning of the show what Japan was about and at the end. The whole show was framed by 2 choruses.
Yeah, but wasn't there, maybe not for you, but for certainly some of the critics, too much of a break?
Oh, that's a whole other.
We were in the
that's
19th
another
century,
subject.
and
That's
suddenly it was like follies, like a hallucination. Out of nowhere came this other thing they were not prepared
That's another
for.
subject. That wasn't your question.
Yeah.
I want to bring that one up. No,
Too.
what we had was originally we designed a sequence which took us from 1863, from the beginning of the Meiji Restoration, that is to say, from the emperor taking over and abolishing the feudal system. Over the next 100 years, it was all to be done in one long 20-minute sequence, and I started to sketch it out. And what would happen, and it would show various things that happened in Japan over the 100 years. I mean, the influx of jazz, Japan becoming a militaristic power, all of that covered in sketches, songs, everything like a mini musical comedy, and accelerating as it went along. I didn't mean in rhythm, but in terms of time. It would get faster and faster, so the whole thing would explode at the end, with everybody being like the rest of the
That's
world.
really
Because,
the same form as in Follies.
Well, not really, because in Follies what happens is that 4 people each have a nervous breakdown at the same time, and that's a different thing. This is telling a chronicle, and we decided that it was going to be both too long and that the audience would be ahead of you. That is to say, the first time you see a Japanese lady come in a Victorian bustle, you've got the point. And why sit through the rest of it? Then it's just an illustrated slide lecture on, and then, jazz came in, and then baseball came in, and then the war came in. And we decided there was no way to solve it except to make a jump cut. And I don't think it's quite successful, but it's much closer to success than from my taste, than those people who criticize it think it is. But I understand the criticism very well, and it's a valid criticism. It worked for me. It didn't for other people.
It was kind of a shock.
It was supposed to be.
Yeah, but it wasn't the shock.
It wasn't a good shock.
I thought I understood what you meant to do.
Then it didn't work for you.
But isn't there also the problem, for instance, with a show like Follies? I mean, I thought that was really a remarkable show, and I like Company very much too in a different way, but that you're a little bit ahead of your audiences, that Hal also, he doesn't want to be repeating himself, in the sense that we're ahead of the taste of the time, and that maybe 10 years from now, people regard these as golden oldies.
It may be. It's like the question from the last draw. I mean, it's certainly possible, but as I say, it's the job of the artist to be ahead of the audience. How else is an audience going to get educated? Be they for paintings or music or whatever, an artist has got to have a vision and say, hey, did you ever think of this door over here? Did you ever look at that hole down there? How about that? The idea is to open doors that other people can then follow, and then it becomes accepted. Again, my favorite image is always the Impressionists. And the idea that we now all consider the Impressionist paintings the most beautiful things in the world, and that 100 years ago, people were throwing stones and tearing the things off the wall because they were so appallingly vulgar and shocking and antisocial. That's all. I don't see why I shouldn't have any music to jump into because
hindsight being the best guide, could you give us a few random thoughts about Do I Hear a Waltz and Anyone Can Whistle?
Well, Anyone Can Whistle is a show I loved dearly. It was merely, the reason for the failure of that show is quite simply that the 2 leading critics hated it a lot. The preview audiences liked it. I see no reason why that show couldn't have had a perfectly nice, respectable run. Again, It was, you know, an experimental show. It would never have had mass appeal, but it certainly couldn't run for a while. But both Kerr and Taubman hated it so much and stamped on it with such heavy hobnail that we just didn't have a chance. And we had no advance. And so it failed. Do I Hear Waltz was a very well-formed dead baby. It had everything a show should have except a raison d'etre. It just was never alive. It's extremely well made, quite well written, and just should never have been done. It was what Mary Rogers calls a why musical. You know, perfectly fine, you can write it, you know. Why, but why do it? And I did it out of a sense of obligation to Arthur Lawrence, who wanted me to do it, and Dick Rogers, because Oscar, before he died, had said, I hope that you will write a show with Dick. He's been very lost when I died. And a few weeks after he died, I went up to Dick's house in the country, and we talked, and he said, I'd like you to write a show. I said, send me anything that I said, you know I want to write music, but if you have anything that excites me at all, I'd be delighted to do one with you, and I'd be honored to do one with you, and I've learned a lot from it. And he sent me some stuff over a period of years, and nothing that I liked very much. And then I'd always liked time with people, although I felt that he should be musical. And in fact, Arthur had asked Rodgers and Hammerstein to do it as a musical, and Oscar had said to him, give me a few years and I'd like to do it. The movie is too recent, it's too fresh in everyone's mind. So a couple of years after the Hepburn movie came out, it was quite a success. And he said, it's a wonderful idea for a musical, but I want a few years, and he died in subsequent, in the next few years he died. So when Arthur came to me, I felt I was came up a number of obligations at once, and it was a mistake. It shouldn't be done. It was a very nice show. So, yes.
Can you tell us the creative evolution of Let Me Entertain You as a motif through Gypsy?
That's, it's interesting you asked that. That is a title suggested by Jerry Robbins. He said, I would love to have a number that they sing as kids, and then that she can sing for striptease. I said, well, what could possibly, I said to Brook, hold those two totally disparate ideas together? And suggested Brook and said, well, can't you just say something like, let me entertain you? I said, that's brilliant. I would never have done it, except he suggested the title. That was the whole, that once he'd said the title, it was all as clear as, you know, it took 10 minutes to write. Once you get that notion that two kids can say, let me entertain you, and then a sexy lady can say, let me entertain you, once you get that notion, the song's written.
The beginnings of the relationship with Hal Prince, how did that come about, and to what extent do you think he has been instrumental in your success?
Oh, well, he's been more than instrumental. In many ways responsible, because Hal's the only producer of the last 25 years who ever dared to take a chance on anything with any consistency. I'm sorry, Stu Armstrong has taken chances also, but otherwise nobody else has. And we knew each other, we were friends. I don't want to get too gossipy about it. He was going around with a girl who's a good friend of mine. And so we met each other when he just got out of the Army. He claims we met before that, we probably did, because we knew a lot of people in Congress. That was in the early 50s, then he went off to do the pajama game. He was a state director. We just remained friends, and then I brought West Side Story to him, and he didn't like it, he and his partner, and we went to a number of other producers, and finally it was dropped, and 2 years later he liked it, and put it on, and that was the beginning of our professional relationship. I don't know what else to say, we just kept seeing each other, and the next show I had, which was Forum, I offered to him, he doesn't like farce, so he turned that one down too, and then a couple of years later, the same pattern repeated itself. And at that point, Jerry Robbins was connected with him, Hal wanted to work with Jerry too, and then Jerry dropped out of it, Hal anyway. And then when he started becoming a director, we just started to sit around and talk about possibly doing something together. So.
Creative input, has he been?
Oh yes, oh gosh. He's like Jerry in that conferences that precede any writing are wildly stimulating. Hal bursts with ideas, and I don't mean just staging ideas about what the evening can be about. And so when we started the company, I brought in the plays because I wanted to tell George Frick what to do with them. I didn't know what they should be done on television. All I knew was that he was a terrific writer. And I'd known George slightly and didn't know that he wrote. In fact, that was the first writing he ever did with those plays. And they were a series of one acts. And I brought them to Hal thinking that he could give George the proper advice. Say, do this on public television, do this at Yale, do this on Broadway, or I want to do it, or whatever. And to my surprise, he said the one thing I never thought of. He said, why don't we make a musical out of this? And I said, because it's not musical material. He said, that's what's interesting about it. And of course, that was what's interesting about it. I said, you've hooked me with that statement, because of course it is impossible. George writes totally verbal material that leaves no room. They're non-singing people. George writes non-singing people. So the fun of Company was how do you make a musical out of non-singing people? And that's the kind of imagination he has. Then when we first started work on it, what I was going to say is, I just sat in his office with him for 2 days and let him ramble on about what he thought marriage was about and relationships were about. And I just took notes. And when I talked to George, I took notes. I talked to Mary Rogers, I took notes. I took notes from probably everybody I know who's gone through either a number of marriages or has avoided marriage, and just collected lots and lots of stuff about marriages and then applied them to the show and in terms of George's characters. But I always take notes on everything else says right at the beginning, and everything the book writer says right at the beginning. Just sheaves. Because I want to get into their minds. I'm a pack rat. I like to take them. I like to suck from other people when you're doing it. I think it's the only way to do a collaborative project. You got to get into everybody else's mind, particularly if you're the songwriter, it seems to me. Because it starts with the playwright, and he has some kind of vision, and Hal has some vision about what the whole evening is going to be about. And I come sweeping up behind and picking things here and there and picking their brains. And it always turns out, good, bad, or indifferent, they're always shows of a piece. You never have the sense with our shows that they're chopped up and that different people came from different continents and worked on it suddenly. And since that, for me, is the sine qua non of the musical, I have no hesitation about it. So that's what those conferences are about, and there's no taking. Very valuable. Very valuable.
Does a show usually evolve from a pre-written book, or is it like a...
No. It usually evolves. In the case of, they're different. In the case of George's plays, it was take these plays, make them musical. You have to rewrite almost all of them. I think only one and a half plays remaining of his original bunch that's still in Company. In the case of Follies, I just wanted to write with Jim Goldman because I read a play of his called The Mighty Giants that I thought was wonderful, and which I wanted to make a musical out of. And he had an idea for this show about Ziegfeld girls, and so we just sat down and wrote. Mostly they're writers' projects in that they start with a vague idea of playwright's mind. Pardon me, and then we evolve it together. It's conceivable I could take a completed script and start to work on it, but I sure wouldn't mind it all that.
And with this, and you're talking now, you sometimes, now of course you're writing lyrics and music, but when there's a separate composer, does he come in later?
Oh, no, right from the beginning. Right from the beginning. As I said, in the case of Gypsy, Julie wasn't very interested in that, so that was really Arthur and me. And Jerry was out on the coast doing the movie King and I, so we were just two babes in the woods together working out. But it was so clear in Arthur's mind, there was no problem. He had the whole show formed in his head the minute he got the notion of what it should be about. That show, surprisingly, that show took exactly 4 months to write from first day of rehearsal. And it's much the quickest that I've been connected with. It didn't even feel pressure at the time. It just flowed. But usually it's, as I say, months of evolving. I shouldn't say months, weeks of sitting down before any writing goes on, discussing thoroughly. Because the biggest problem about doing a musical as a collaborative effort is to be sure, this sounds like sophistry, but it's true, to be sure that you're all writing the same show. You don't all have to think that it's about the same thing, but you've got to be sure that it's the same show. That's to say, Company is about X for Hal, Y for George, and Z for me. But for all of us, it's the same show. We all see the same show. Most shows founder because of that, I think. There's an uncertainty of what the evening is about, and why it's there, and what it's telling you.
I particularly love the use of the chorus in Company. When you use the chorus as a thematic thing, and for people are partly characters, and they're partly all married people.
That's one of the things we evolved over those few weeks. I mean, that sounds like a simple idea now, but it took us weeks to get there.
Well, when I saw it, I thought it was quite a new idea, because I hadn't...
It was. You know. That's why it took a long time to get to.
And it's expanded.
Now it's used all the time.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. Yeah. Company's full of innovative things, and they all came about through endless discussion of taking this intractable material and how do we make a musical out of it. I mean, for example, there was no main character in those plays. They were all about different characters. So how do you make the evenings? An evening of 5 with one-act musicals? What is it? Finding out how to hold it together led to things like using the characters as part chorus, commenting on each other. All the songs, none of the songs occur within the action. They're always from the outside, unless there are musical scenes in Barcelona. But everything else is divorced, and yet it's still a book musical. It's not a review. It's in that, as I said earlier, twilight zone between book and review. And that's a form, I think, that's coming into its own all the time. It's really interesting.
I think that's more accepted because Gypsy is, of course, an older form.
Oh yes, but I mean, one of the reasons Company was not a big hit was that people would not accept a musical that had no plot. They just wouldn't accept it. They'd never been given one before. Except The Hair, which is which is Health Department, which is a whole other form.
Did you also use it as a way of expanding fantasy? Because it's such a down-to-earth musical, just the nitty-gritty, and then it sort of expands.
No, George writes very specific plays, and the whole thing is written very specifically, and his plays are absolutely about that. Everything is absolutely detailed, naturalistic, and everything George writes, except because I happen to think that way down deep he's a poet, it comes out as something else. He has a way of getting to the essences of characters. Yet the dialogue is absolutely overheard from the living room next door. So that whole show is based on very real things. It's just the style of it is abstract, and that's one of the things that Hal wanted. Another thing that might interest you is true of both Hal and Jerry Robbins, and probably true of most of the other musicians that I've worked with them, is that the first conference that they have with their set designers, after the initial couple of conferences with the authors, they immediately go to their set designers. The set for a Company was fully designed in a model built before I'd written a single song. And in fact, I devised the opening of Company for the set. I looked at the set, saw the elevator, and thought, okay, I've got to use that elevator in the opening number. Now, if people are on the upper level, how am I going to get them down? I thought of sustaining that long note love to get them off the levels down there, the whole thing, picking the moment when the audience realizes that it's a workable elevator, because that's a theatrical moment. You don't want to throw it away. It's got to be embedded in the song, and you've got to somehow reach a point in the song where suddenly the elevator starts to move and everybody in the audience does that.
Is it true? I heard somewhere that you designed. Wait a minute. Let me
draw a line.
Wait a minute. That you made a set design for that. It was subsequently thrown out, but that your visual conception was part of the.
No, I looked at Boris's set and designed the number for the set. In fact, when I first worked with Michael on that show, and that was the first number he heard, he was astonished. He said, but nobody has ever done this for me before. He said, usually numbers I just have to figure out what to do with them. I said, oh no, I was taught by Jerry Robbins to plot and plan each moment of staging as a blueprint, and then let the director vary from it as he wishes. But never to leave him stuck, say, all right, well, during this chorus, we'll do something, and then when we get to the second chorus, no, I never do that. I always say, in the first chorus, Bobby's down in the center, they're all spread around the stage. Now we hear voices from up here, down there, et cetera, et cetera. It was all planned out. Now, of course, Michael made his own inventions and variations on that, but I gave him a solid blueprint, so he didn't have to just founder any time. And very few songwriters do that because they haven't been taught to. And it's always up then to the choreographer and the director to invent. Well, they should invent, but they should have something to invent from. And you should be able, I think, to tell any director exactly what you see on the stage when you're writing a song. Sometimes I get stuck, and I will call Hal and I'll say, okay, now when she comes out into the living room, what do you see on the stage? I can't get a feeling for the number about how it looks on stage, except, well, maybe she goes over and picks up the coat on the chair. I said, okay, now I got it. It's all about the teddy. I'm making all this up. But it's all about getting a specific to work from, because, to paraphrase, as Fitzgerald says, when you write specifically, you become universal. When you write universal, you become nothing.
Do you think you'd ever like to stage one of the shows that you've written?
Not a chance. I don't have the patience with the actors. I can coach for singing because it only takes, the most you spend on a song maybe is half an hour. The idea of being cooped up for 8 hours with egoistic children is, I don't know. On the other hand, I hasten to add, in case that just sounds like a nasty remark, that's exactly what stimulates some directors. I mean, that's exactly why Mike Nichols likes to direct. He loves dealing with different personalities. He said that's what's fun for him. It's not the planning of it, it's getting there and working with the actors. Hal the same way. He comes to life as soon as he's got a person to deal with. That's exactly what I hate. I like sitting home and I never want to deal with a person. So it's just a different temperament, a different desire.
The question way in the back.
You said that you had visualized certain characters getting inside their heads to write songs sometimes. Has it ever happened that you've written a song and then when the character shows up in the flesh, it doesn't look right to you?
No, not often. Not often, but yes, it has happened. Let me try to think. Trying to think of some of the songs that were cut from. I can't think of one off. It has happened. I'm not sure it's ever gotten past the rehearsal stage. The only thing. You can usually smell it coming when. Oh yes, I know exactly. A very good example. The original song I wrote for Amy and Company was, I thought, a very brilliant number called "The Wedding Is Off," and I used to lay people low in the living rooms. I'd get the piano and do it, and they would just fall about it. It was just the most extraordinary, brilliant number. And they said, "Oh, and you caught the characters up perfectly. You know everything you need to know about it." I said, "Yes, I know one." And we cast Beth Powell, and she read the part perfectly. And I'd written it for the dialogue that George and he fleshed that character out very clearly. It was a very detailed character. I knew exactly what she spoke. And as soon as Beth started to sing it didn't work. Beth, the actress, simply couldn't handle that number. Something was wrong, and eventually I decided that it was partly wrong casting and partly wrong writing. That is to say, she was right for the part in every way except this way, and I had written the song perfectly except for the fact that she was playing it. So I rewrote it to Getting Married Today, which she handled perfectly.
I was curious as to what the problems were with the Book of Follies.
I don't.
It was the one Tony Award that Follies didn't win, in addition to Best Musical, and it seems that it was because of the book that it did not win.
I don't think that's why it didn't win. I mean, that's maybe why. First of all, let's talking about Tonys. What are we talking about? We're talking about awards given by idiots. What are awards for? And who gives them? So let's leave awards out of it. Awards mean nothing. It's nicer to win than to lose, but they're meaningless, except the Tony Awards are good for the box office. That's the only value they have, and for people's egos. And otherwise, I would make a move to see them abolished, except that they were really good for publicizing the theater. So that's no standard whatsoever. I happen to think the Book of Follies is absolutely brilliant. I'll tell you why people resist it, the people who don't like it. They said, "Oh, those people don't seem like real people." They're not. They're essences. The book is very short. The whole idea of Follies is that it's an evening of 22 songs, and that there's a constant sense of the past going all the time, which is through all these pastiche numbers that keep coming back, bubbling to the surface like something cooking. And the book is, as a result, very short. So what Jim did, and it's also the way he writes, happens to suit his temperament as a writer perfectly. He always writes essences. People in Lion and Winter aren't real people. They're essences of people. That's a high, they have the succinctness of poetry, whether you think it's poetic or not, or like it or not. They are absolutely, I have to use the word again, essences. That's what they are in Follies, and nobody had ever seen that in a musical before. And so as a result, for some people, they seem bloodless and inhuman. Not for people who saw it 2 times. Once the initial shock is over, and people are talking that terribly artificial language, because all the dialogue in Follies is very artificial. A, it's Jim's style, and B, it's exactly right for that piece. And I defend that book vigorously. The fact that you get a Tony Award doesn't mean anything to me, except I'm sorry for Jim.
You previously said that you differed with Bernstein and that you preferred poetry and you preferred conversational lyrics. Now you're saying that you prefer 2 of your librettists you quoted as being poets.
Yes, absolutely. Well, in the case of Follies, I think it was a correct choice. In the case of West Side Story, one of the reasons I don't like the lyrics in West Side Story was I was led around by the nose a little bit because I was a young punk dealing with a lot of older, much more experienced people than I. And so it isn't that I took what they said as gospel, but I was very influenced by, particularly by Lenny, in going for things like, it's hard for me to say them out loud, songs like Tonight and Maria and things like that.
But what I'm saying is that it seems that in your progression past this, you started, you seem to be saying that you're turning around, the lyrics are becoming conversational, the dialogue is becoming poetic.
No, you're talking about over a period of time. When I believed in conversational lyrics only, and it was what I was sort of trained to do, and what I liked, because I'm at least as much influenced by Dorothy Fields as I am by Oscar Hammerstein. Dorothy Fields wrote conversational lyrics, and they always fell on the ear the way people talk. And I found that I could do that. One of the reasons I've been doing things like Pacific Overtures and night music is to get away from that. Again, to stretch muscles, because it's no fun as a writer just to do what you know you can do. And I still believe in certain principles about conversational lyrics having to do with the fact that the lyric must fall on the music the way speech rises and falls. But the speech itself, if it's called for by the piece, can be heightened speech, can be non-realistic, non-naturalistic speech. The problem with it, quite often, is that music, by its very nature, is so rich and so poetic that it blows up the lyric. And it's like whatever that fairy tale is, the Frog Prince, or whatever, the frog that bursts. You have to be very careful and underwrite, even if you're trying to be poetic. You have to underwrite, and that means slightly more conversational. The kind of lyrics that Lenny likes, and you can see them in the Mass, are the kind that blow up too much, in my opinion, when the music is underneath it, because the music is informing it with such size and richness that the lyric gets swamped, gets drowned. And that's why when I hear a line tonight, today the world was just an address, it's a perfectly nice thought, and a rather poetic one on paper. But as soon as it's sung, it makes me cringe with embarrassment because it says, "Here's poetry!" And I just go. A poetic line is, "I just called her name Maria." That's a poetic line because the music makes a plain line poetic if you said it right. As in, "Oh, what a beautiful morning," which is my favorite example of a line that I wouldn't have the nerve to put on paper because it is so banal and boring. He knew what he was writing. He knew that when Rogers said it, he said it right, it was going to soar, and it does. Whereas the problem with images like the lark that's learning to pray is that when it's sung, you suddenly feel, no, it's just too much. West Side's full of that. Not all of it, but most of it. Anything else?
Well,
Did the musical demands of night music present any problems in casting or rehearsal?
Well, casting, yes, because I knew it had to be well sung. What we decided early on was that whoever would play Desiree wouldn't have to sing, because we needed a sort of personality, not necessarily a name, but a kind of, she is a catalytic lady, but she's got to have real something going on that everybody can go tumbling into walls over her, and that she's the cause of all this brouhaha. Having made that decision, I then said, now, since this is going to be an operetta, we must cast people who can sing. We just must. The only one maybe we can get away with is the Countess, because she's going to have like 1 or 2 songs, and maybe we don't need a singer for her, but I really want singers, not actors who can sing the other parts. Because I tend to like in casting actors who can sing. I mean, sometimes the music suffers, but I have a feeling the whole evening gains. But not in that case. Well, it was very difficult to find, particularly somebody to play Anne. Well, the only person who's ever successfully played Anne, as far as I'm concerned, is Vicky, who played Anne in the original cast. But she's the only girl we ever found who could act and sing equally well. And that's a hard part to sing. It's got a large range. It's got an octave and 6. And she has to go through men, and she plays a bitch, and yet she has to be somehow endearing or enchanting to the audience. It's very, very hard to do. And it was rather hard to find a man, too. It's very difficult to find singers who can act with any fluidity at all. It isn't so much that they're stiff or sticks, they lack something, because their impulses don't come from the acting impulse. They come from that impulse. And no matter how intelligent they are, they're not solid on the stage. You never have the feeling that you're watching the character. You always have the feeling, too often have the feeling you're watching an actor, meaning a singer, playing a part. Well, but it's still playing.
You've written straight scripts and even some famous Topper scenes. Have you thought of doing the book for your own musicals or for somebody else?
Much too difficult, and I have not written straight scripts. I've written 1 movie script.
Last issue.
And the only reason I did that was because I'm a freak about murder mysteries, and Herbie Ross said, "You've always talked about doing one, why don't you do one? I can get the money and we'll put it on the screen." I said, "You gotta do one." And
there's not a musical murder mystery hiding in your soul somewhere?
Now think about it. There's no such thing. There can't be, because the whole essence of what a murder, my kind of murder mystery. It's about meaning. The traditional English tricky murder mystery, the puzzle mystery, is anti-musical. I mean, you know, what do people sing about? You know,
Songs to music then.
that's not a mystery to begin with. But the whole idea of the mystery is that the characters are not real. I mean, one of the things I said to Tony when we were writing Sheila, I said, we must be careful not to make these people real, because real people don't go around doing this elaborate nonsense. Just like they don't sing either, but they don't do this elaborate nonsense. And therefore, we will not believe the mystery if these people are too characterized. One of the faults in I think in the way the movie was done is that the actors played it too much for character. The only one who really understood what that, on the first reading in France, only member of the cast who understood what the script was about was James Mason. Because the only questions he asked was, how does the piece of wood get out of the folds of the robe? I would explain. Everybody else was saying, well now, do you see this character as, and I thought, no, that's already, there's no answer to that question. You can't say it to actors because it hurts their egos. But I wanted to say, your function is to pick up the roses and put it over there. That's your character. Because that's what the script is about. It's not about interplay. It's not about personal relationships. It's about pieces of paper and pieces of wood and bottle tops. And that's the notion. Only Mason understood it because A, he's English, he comes from that tradition, and B, in his youth, he did a number of murder mysteries, and he understands what that's about. You know, he knows what it is to act too, but not in this. He knew exactly where it was. Well, the director and the actors, unfortunately, didn't, and they played it too real. And it should have been made in the 30s, when people didn't care about characterization.
We move to another tangent. As a man of the theater who hates operetta, could we have your views about opera today? The writing that a composer, the difficulty of writing one facing, and any advice you might give to composers of opera trying to be successful on the board.
I've never enjoyed opera very much, and I haven't seen very many of them. It's been a form that has never gotten to me, except on a few occasions, which I'll touch on. Because I find that most opera just takes too much time to tell too little. I mean, I was essentially brought up on plays, and I like things to happen, and I like character, and I like character relationships and that sort of thing. And when it comes time to sing, take out the garbage, I can't take that. On the other hand, I understand the opera composer's difficulty. If the line is necessary, does he say it? You know, like Bizet did in Carmen, and make it a sort of musical, or does he sing it? On the other hand, or in a couple of instances, as in the case of Porgy and Bess, which I consider an opera simply because most of it is sung, or in the case of Peter Grimes, somehow geniuses can do it. I saw the first act of Peter Grimes again because I had 2 hours that I could do that. Get to the Opera House in Chicago this last week where we were opening side by side, and I played hooky from the show one night, just see the first act, just to see it again, because it always shatters me. It always leaves me limp. And I don't know how he did it, because they are all singing about, that nothing is happening in that opera. I mean, that's the dullest plot in the world, and I can't figure out why I have to be carried out every time. I'm so moved and so upset, and it affects my sleep for days afterwards. So I have no advice, because I wouldn't know how to do it, and I'm not interested in writing an opera. I'm interested in singing more in musicals, but I don't know that I could ever write a through composed piece, because I don't know how I believe in it. The new one, Sweeney Todd, I intended to be an opera. That was when I saw this little play, I thought it would make a real opera. It's got an operatic plot. It's very melodramatic. The facts growing Guignol. And it's all about intense emotions. Everybody's at the peak of their emotions all the time. It seems like a natural. I realized that the plot is so packed. It's not complex, but it's packed. That in order to sing everything and give it air and breathing space and to savor the moments would require a 9-hour opera. And it simply is not the size of The Ring as a story. It's a little melodrama about, a fella killing people for revenge. And I realized that I was stumped, and it would have to have that. And I'm sorry about that, because I thought maybe I can make a real sung piece. I don't know how to do it. So I wouldn't know how to do it. I would think a lot of it has to do with choosing the subject matter very carefully.
How do you feel about Verdi, who does have plots with a lot of things going on?
The couple of Verdi operas I've seen have just bored me to death. I mean, I think some of Falstaff is thrilling, and I think some of Falstaff is just boring beyond belief. I really would rather hear it spoken sung. I can't give you a very intelligent or educated answer because I just don't know enough operas. All I know is that most of them bore me. The other one, of course, that kills me is Bohème. I just can't believe that as a piece of dramatic writing. That, is against my argument. I mean, every time I see something like Bohème or Peter Garn, something like that, I think, well, I'm all wrong. It can be done. You got to do it. And then I realize who these men are, and it's like, stick to your last. And that's not false modesty. I just realize how difficult it is to make an opera hold one's attention. I'm not saying that opera buffs. Opera buffs will sit through anything because for a very good reason. They're like people who go to rock concerts. They're primarily interested in the stars. They're going to see performances rather than operas. And yes, but with new pieces, I don't know about that. I think they're going to hear their old favorites again, and that's exactly what people who go to rock concerts do. The songs that they've come to love on the records, they go and they hear it, and they all start to scream the minute the first notes come out, because they're the people they love doing the song they love live in front of them. It's exactly the same reaction, as far as I'm concerned, that the people who go and scream at Tibaldi. Exactly the same thing. They're going to see performers. We don't have much in the way of performance theater on Broadway anymore because all the performers, as we all know, are out in California doing television. And as you well know, in the 20s and 30s, people would not go to see the new Gershwin show. They go see the new Marilyn Miller show. Maybe Gershwin wrote the score or not, but that wasn't why they went. They didn't go for anything but the performers. They went to see the new W.C. Fields show. They went to see, the new Ethel Merman show. That's no longer true because we don't have those kind of stars on Broadway because they make a lot handsomer and easier to produce. I have time for one more question.
I think I might have dreamed this from a few years ago. I remember seeing you in a play on Channel 17.
That was the other favor I did for free. He said, look, I'm doing June Moon, and that happened to be a play I knew and liked very much. And he said, I need somebody who can play the piano and do wisecracks. And so he looked at me and I said, well, I can do my own wisecracks in the living room, but I don't know that I can do anybody else's. But I had been a good actor in college. I just hadn't acted in years. I was appalled to find out that I couldn't read it. I just lost all of that because I become so inhibited about performing in public. When I was a kid, I loved it. But about the age of 18, I had it. And I just can't do it. I was so self-conscious and so uptight all the time. It was one of the most unpleasant experiences of my life. And I just blushed and sweated my way through that entire experience. But
I enjoyed it.
thank you. It was a good play. And the other actors were just swell. At any rate, forgive me for breaking this up, but I have to go downtown a little earlier than I thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Come back next year.
Okay, sure.
Next week, Celeste Holm.